Hey guys. Welcome to the first video of many. Today I'd like to walk through the syllabus, then give some pointers on how to succeed in this class, and then begin to talk about the dimensions of thinking, what we call dimensional thinking. So I'm turning on my timer because I'm aware of how valuable your time is. So if you would go to your Canvas page, please, and open up the front page, that's where you should find the syllabus. So rather than me reading through it and patronizing you all as though you couldn't read for yourselves, I'm just going to hit some highlights. So obviously this class is asynchronous, meaning that you can watch these videos at any time. One of the biggest enemies of students for this particular class is procrastination. Now, every semester I have students tell me how motivating procrastination is, and it can be. It can also be overwhelming, and there's a lot of work in this particular class. And so I feel concerned because recent evidence indicates that students will procrastinate, for example, watching these videos, and then they'll be overwhelmed to find that on a Saturday night they've got 6 hours of videos to watch, and the quiz was due yesterday at midnight, like on Friday night. So it's important that you learn how to eat elephants. This class is big and it's hairy like a mammoth, big old elephant. And you eat an elephant a bite at a time. There are a few Draper philosophies that I would like to share, and I hope for at least one or two of you that these philosophies will help make a difference. The first philosophy is dig your ditches early. What that means is when there's a job to do and you don't want to do it first. There are other techniques in the motivational literature like eating the frog. Do the thing that is hardest for you to do earliest in your day. For me, for example, this morning I got up and I worked out for an hour on these old aching bones with these old aching muscles, and I'm sore and I'm tired and I'm still a little sweaty. That's the hardest part of my day, right? So get up and you do that first. It's oftentimes we want to have ease and comfort or fun first. We want to watch our Netflix or our YouTubes or play our video games, and then we'll tell ourselves that we will work later. You'll find yourself on average more productive and on average more content in your life if you learn to work first. So this particular philosophy comes from an experience I had when I was 12 years of age. My father was rarely around. He was a bishop for the LDS Church, and he was a doctoral student, and he was working. So if any of you know university culture, professional culture, and religious culture, you know that now my dad has 26 to 28 hours of work to put in a 24-hour day. So we rarely, if ever, saw him. Well, one Saturday, much to my chagrin and dismay, Dad comes and shakes my bed at 5 a.m. and tells me that they've changed the water turn. So we had to grow some of our own food because we were really poor. And the water turn means irrigation. The water comes out of the mountains, down canals, through ditches, etc., and then across our little farm. And so because they had changed the way the water was going to come, we needed to dig a whole new ditch across, a good 50, 60 yards. And he says, let's get it done now while it's still nice and cool outside. And I was like, it's Saturday, I'm tired, I want to sleep, Dad. And he says, okay, you do you. Understand, though, that before you go to bed tonight, your half of that big ditch will need to be done. And the ditch would be about 2 to 3 feet deep and 3 feet wide. Like it's a big old ditch. And I was like, Dad, let me see. He says, okay, fine. And so sure enough, about 9 a.m. I peel my sorry corpse out of bed and I slowly leisurely get some cereal, and then I wander outside about 10 or 11. By that time my dad's been done for a while, even though he had a lot of work to do. He got up, worked a few hours, hit it really hard, took a shower, and around noon it was about 105 degrees, and I'm just sweating my little chubby self. Oh my gosh, sweating so hard. And Dad's sitting over in the shade of a tree sipping lemonade, and I'd look over at him. He was reading a book, and he'd wave at me and give me a thumbs up and point to the work I needed to do. It took me years to master the concept. That was the beginning. If I had gotten up early, and if I had worked hard, in the heat of the day, I could be sitting in the shade. And so likewise, tonight after you watch this video, if you get all your work done, you'll be able to kick back, and there's nothing else for you to do tonight. You can watch your Netflix, make out with your lover, play your video games, and there's nothing hanging over your head. It's bliss. The other one is cows got to be milked. For those of you that have worked on farms, you know that cows, you need to milk the cow, not just so you can have milk to drink, but because if you don't milk cows that are lactating, it's really, really hard on the cows. So much so that if you don't milk a cow, they can get mastitis. They can get an infection in their udder, and that means that you can lose the milk out of that cow and maybe even lose the whole cow if the poor cow goes septic. It's painful for the cow, it's miserable, and so no matter how you feel every day, you've got to get those cows milked. And I can remember I was 15 and I'm sicker than a dog, stomach flu. I got fluids spurting out of both ends of my digestive tract, and old Farmer Dickerson comes up and it's my turn and I'm sick. And he says, okay, well, I need you to have 2 pails. I need to have 2 pails for your poop and your vomit, and I need you to have another pail for the milk. And of course, we won't use any of the milk that you get out of the cows, you milk out of them cows, but those cows got to be milked. And so it sucked. I'm not going to take, milk, then go over 3 feet, blah. It was not a pleasant experience for me, for the cow, or for Farmer Dickerson. Here's the thing though, when you learn to work, even when you don't feel like working, your life becomes much more productive and you're much more content. That okay, these cows got to be milked. These assignments need to be done. No more, no less, just this. And I will do it no matter how I feel. There's a t-shirt you may see me wear this, because I've got 62 of these, 72, oh my gosh, I've got a lot of these t-shirts. They're custom made for me by my sister. And one of them you may see through the course of these videos says, an ounce of discipline beats a pound of regret. And a little bit of extra effort now can really help me not regret life later. Like a little bit of extra, I'll get out of bed even though I feel terrible, I'll get these cows milked. Saves me a pound of losing a cow later, right? It saves me the misery and sadness of losing an animal, not to mention the potential poverty. Likewise, it's regular students tell me that they don't feel like doing this. Of course, this is boring and hard. We don't like doing boring and hard things. We like doing fun, easy things. And when we get in the habit, though, of doing hard things because they are hard, surprisingly enough, your life gets easier because you can get in, get it done, and be done with it. Cows got to be milked. Doesn't matter how you feel. As a psychologist, one of the things I'm interested in is how students succeed when they're taking online courses. And the answer is, well, self-discipline. But self-discipline is also exhausting. If you're just bootstrapping yourself, just pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, and you're just going to do this, that gets exhausting after a while. It turns out that self-discipline is important, and what is equally as important is setting up structures of support. Okay, for example, I am sitting in here. This you guys can't see this whole room, but it's a very long dining room. And I come in here and I work because my comfortable chair downstairs, the big old overstuffed lazy boy surrounded by huge gaming monitors and a very powerful computer and awesome high-end speakers, that is my fun zone. And so if I'm down there, then there's all these video games I want to play and fun emails I want to write and memes I want to create, and I'm not doing this. So therefore I create a space in order for me to do this rather than do that, and it takes less effort. I'm not downstairs constantly, okay, I got to get back to what I was doing. Instead, I'm here, and this is all I'm going to do. This is this space. I've got this little laptop that is lovely, but all it's good for is what I'm doing right now. And I've got you all here, and I'm very grateful for it, and we're in this space together. I'm not in my gaming chair downstairs. And the other thing is time. So I'm just giving you space and time structures. There are many others that you can use. I'm just going to give you those two examples. And the other is I have this structure. I get up at a certain time, and I do this thing for this period of time, and then I am done. And having that kind of, having those kinds of structures of support are very important, so you have to exercise less self-discipline. So there are many more Draper philosophies that I may share throughout the course of these videos, but I'd like you to keep the two that I've shared this morning in mind. Please dig your ditches early. Do the hard things that you need to do as early as you can in your day. And I know some of you who have kids and you're working, the earliest in your day may be 8 p.m., and I'm very sympathetic. Do what you can, and then you can relax. Okay? And the other one is, cow's got to be milked. There's a lot of work in this class. There's a lot of reading in this class. There's a lot of writing in this class. And the more you get in the habit of chipping away at it, eating your frog, doing the hard thing first and getting it done, the more you can contemplate and actually learn. So if you'll notice from the class there, so let's scroll down on the syllabus. So read through your goals and objectives. There are course modules very carefully designed, not by me. I just had everything lumped in on Canvas, but my assistant instructor came in and she lumped it all together. She said it was very helpful for students to have this, and all evidence points, of course, to that she is correct. So I'm going to hit assumptions and implications even harder in my next unit. But for now, a big part of this class is you have assumptions and beliefs and implications. And one of the things I find is that assumptions predict more your behavior as a person, especially as a therapist, than your beliefs do. So your assumptions, think of them as like preconscious habits of reacting in the world. These are preconscious habits from which you make sense of the world. And assumptions are slower to change at times than beliefs are, but not always. And they're often, again, they're hard to get in touch with. There are these kind of preconscious, not subconscious or unconscious, but kind of like they're there and you have a sense of them, but they're much more important in terms of how you live your life and how you behave than the story you tell yourself, which is your belief. And so many times, for example, as I'm supervising therapists, I'll be watching them work either in real time as co-therapists, like both two therapists in the room with the client, me and my supervisee, or I'm watching videotapes of their work, and lo and behold, what they're doing in therapy doesn't line up with their beliefs. You know, these explicit stories they tell themselves. Well, I am a systems theorist. I'm a cognitive behavioral therapist. I'm eclectic, and I'm eclectic in these ways. But what they're actually doing in therapy isn't any of those beliefs. That they have these underlying assumptions about what good behavior is, what good relationships are, what people should be doing. And all of those are guiding their therapy far more than these stories they tell themselves about what kind of therapist they are. And it frustrates me as a supervisor how few of them are able to actually get in touch with what they assume. It's like, well, this is the first time I've ever heard about assumptions. And there's a whole history and reason why we don't teach this anymore as a field, and all the reasons are spurious and ludicrous when you look at them. At the same time, though, we're going to do things differently in this class. Therapists who can get in touch with themselves wholly, and I don't mean that in some masturbatory sense, I mean that in a soulful sense, like who can really get in, okay, who am I, where am I, what do I really feel about this? They tend to be wiser and eventually, if not in the short run, more effective therapists. So assumptions are our preconscious habits of thinking and feeling. And here in our next unit, I'll share the relationships between assumptions and beliefs. Okay, and the relationships between assumptions and the implications for how we treat other people. But for now, your papers in this class are really heavily laden on what do you assume and what do you believe. How are those assumptions and beliefs similar, and how are they different? Okay? And so your first set is all about assumptions and beliefs, and we've got this whole list about agency, epistemology, causes of human behavior, things like that. So it's all there in your syllabus, and it looks like I need to edit this. Hopefully I will remember to do that, because I've got 2 assumptions about agency right now, and 2 causes. Oh yeah, assumptions, belief, but I do, oh yes, in human learning. Turns out I don't need to edit this, it's actually good. So your first set of papers is on what do you assume and what do you believe about agency. And so in that one you need to really dig into, okay, what do I assume? For some of you it may be easier to start with your belief, like, okay, I believe this. And then when you start really examining your behavior and how you really feel about it, you may find that there are similarities and dissimilarities between your beliefs and your assumptions. Other people find it's actually easier to do the hard work first, to really dig into their guts and to really get into, okay, what do I assume? Because here's the story I tell myself about free will or human agency, but how do I actually act towards other people? And so then your theoretical orientation paper, your big final paper at the end of this particular semester, is on how it is that so you know what your assumptions and beliefs are, and how then are you going to actually practice therapy. So we are going to cover 9 theories of therapy in this particular class, depending on how you count them. And for these particular theories of therapy, do any of them line up approximately with your assumptions and beliefs? So do the assumptions of a person-centered psychotherapist or client-centered psychotherapist, do those assumptions line up with yours? Does a psychoanalytic, like a Freudian, do their assumptions line up with yours? And you notice I'm hitting assumptions because these writers won't tell you what their assumptions are. You've got to read between the lines. You've got to analyze what you are reading and go, oh, that's what he seems to be assuming. He's not coming around and telling me. He's just telling me his belief, right? Or she's just telling me her belief. And so once you get in the habit of this, then when you're watching a movie or a TV show or whatever else, you're kind of in the habit of already unpicking the assumptions of the people in film. And so it can kind of ruin movies for you, by the way. So a couple of things to be aware of. These, at the assumptions and beliefs paper, so the first set about what you assume and believe about these various things, for that set of questions, you are the source of information. You don't go out and do research on this, okay? Now, you're welcome to read up on the question of what is human agency. Feel free to do that. But you are the subject of analysis here. You are the one that is being researched, and you're being researched by you. So don't cite, don't reference, don't research on this first set of essays, okay? And you'll see the due date in your syllabus. You are the reference. You don't need to cite yourself, okay? You are the subject under scrutiny. You are the one being evaluated, and you are the one evaluating you, okay? And so you're the one. What are my assumptions? What are my beliefs? And start trying to pick those apart. When it comes to figuring out what those are, I found it very helpful to go, back when I did this assignment 100 years ago, I found it very helpful to take a bunch of my colorful, free-thinking friends out for coffee. And we sat in a little coffee house, and I provided all the coffee. And, it was expensive on my poor college student budget. But we just sat for like 3 hours and brainstormed together. And they would call me out. Well, Matt, you say you believe this, but you act in this way. And my actions and my attitudes, my emotions are much more involved with our assumptions. They are our beliefs. So it was very helpful for me to talk out loud about it, and other people talk back to me. Other people who have had this assignment find that overwhelming, and instead they pay careful attention to themselves throughout their days and to really get a sense of, okay, how am I assuming? What do I believe? Now the second paper, or the second major paper, your theoretical orientation paper. Now for this one, again, read very carefully the criteria. This one, unlike the first one, you need to cite sources like crazy, okay? You need to cite sources all over the place. That you need to research your theoretical orientation and really justify to me that this is a good theoretical orientation that fits you, okay? Now, you and I understand that your theoretical orientation will necessarily need to evolve the more therapy experience you get. But I want you to have a place to start, because in graduate school, they don't actually teach you how to do therapy before they require you to do therapy. Therapy requires that you actually go out and do it. It follows what's called an epistemology of practice. Go and do, and then we'll tell you what you're doing wrong. That's really the way therapy is taught. At the same time, though, when you have a supervisor and they're saying, well, why did you do this and this with the client? And you're in the hot seat to justify the therapy you're doing. It's helpful to say, well, according to my theoretical orientation, so-and-so, 1992 said this, and so-and-so, 2010 said that, so therefore I'm following those guys. You know what I mean? To have something in hand where you can refer back to, okay, this is my first tiny stepping stone in my career, and I'm going to learn to balance on this my first semester. After that, the stepping stones, I hope, will get broader and more closely paced together, and you'll have a better sense of what you're doing. But that first stone, solid under your feet, is this paper, where here is my theoretical orientation, and I know it's going to work for me in general, okay? Because if it's working for you, by the way, it's working for your clients. So please note on cheating, on plagiarism, these are really bad juju. You see in the syllabus what's going to happen. Now, reading quizzes. There's a lot of reading in this class. A lot of reading. And if you're taking this class during the summer, it's the same amount of reading during the fall. You just have half the time to do it in. Okay, so it feels like twice as much reading, even though it's the same amount, because the parameters are shorter. Regardless if you're taking this summer or spring or fall, it's a lot of reading to do. And so you need to stay on top of it. You'll notice in here when the reading quizzes are due. So you have quizzes over, you read a chapter, there's a quiz on it, and when those reading chapters are due. Okay, likewise, there are what are called attendance quizzes. Because this class is asynchronous, and I cover a lot of material that's not in the textbooks in this particular format. And through this particular format is where you'll get most of the information in terms of how to actually think like a therapist, how to actually think like a good, wise, hopefully caring, critical thinker. And therefore, attendance is mandatory in this class, in an asynchronous class. Whoa, how do you do that? Attendance quizzes, okay? So every one of these little lectures that I'm doing and posting on the YouTubes, and my assistant instructor will facilitate getting these posted, and, well, I'm the one that's posting them. She'll be the one to make sure they're linked on Canvas. And so, so there will be attendance quizzes. So every one of these videos, there will be an attendance quiz. They're worth a certain number of points, and they're due at a certain time. All of that is under your module, and please double check it's in your syllabus as well. Okay, so some of you are saying, Matt, why are you being so vague? Because I don't know if this same class is going to be taught in the same format in the fall or spring. And the other thing is I would like to use this as a backup for when classes, hopefully soon, will be face-to-face, that I'll have all of this online for students to go back to, even if I'm teaching it synchronously at some point. Okay, the final exam. The final exam is 100 questions. You have 100 minutes. Holy mother forking sureballs. Like it is only over this portion of the course. It's on the critical thinking part, it's on the thinking like a therapist part, thinking introspectively, thinking critically, trying to engage in wisdom, and all of that is in your final. So your final doesn't come out of your textbooks, right? That's what the quizzes are for. Your final exam is for this. So therefore it behooves you to take very good notes as you're listening to me prattle on, and try to get a good sense of what's going on in the class. So to that end, I have some advice. Here is a notebook, and it's set up in the style of a former student in the class. You'll notice that what he did is he punched these pages on the wrong edge, right? Rather than having the hole punch on this side, he hole punched it on this side. Under Files in your Canvas course are the lecture notes for the entire class. And so what he did very wisely is he went through and printed out the lecture notes a week ahead, and then as he would listen to these videos, he would write notes on this side. So he's following through with my outline here as I'm telling stories and cussing and throwing things around this room, and he would then he would take very careful notes to help him remember these concepts and to apply them on this particular page. I thought that was brilliant, and he did very well in the class. So I would encourage you to do something similarly. Okay. So the final exam, again, 100 minutes, 100 questions. It's not something to procrastinate. If you say, oh, okay, well, it's online, that's easy, I'll just go through and flip through my notes. If you were to print out all of the lecture notes for this class, there's no just flipping through, especially because the exam is conceptual. It's not a factual, who said what at what time. There's none of those questions on the exam. Instead, they're very, very theoretical questions. Your colleague comes in and says this and this and this about a client. Based on that, what can you deduce that your client, backing up. Your colleague comes in and says this, this, and this about a particular client. Based on what your colleague said, what can you deduce about what your colleague assumes on this particular issue? So based on this statement, what does your colleague assume about agency? What do they assume about epistemology, human learning? What do they assume about what causes their client's behavior? And so it's those kind of questions. And if you don't understand this material at a very conceptual level and cannot apply it, you're really going to struggle. But if you do understand it at a conceptual level and can then apply the concepts, you'll do extraordinarily well on the exam. So on the one hand, the exam is extremely intimidating and a lot of hard work. On the other hand, it delights me how well students do on this exam on average. It's a lot of work for them, they study really hard, but when they practice applying these skills of analyzing assumptions and beliefs, they do really well. So it's a hard test, most students do really well on it. Okay, so there's a little bit of extra credit available in the class, and it's restaurant extra credit. I hope Vampire Penguin, it's up in American Fork, I hope they're still open. And then Caliche Kitchen in South Orem. Okay, Vampire Penguin, fancy shaved ice. Okay, Caliche Kitchen, Mexican sushi, like dudes, it's a thing, I had no idea. So picture a very run-down, eclectically furnished, greasy place. Their tacos are amazing, so support them, okay? I may need to redo this part of the video later if I choose somewhere else next semester. Now, for those of you that are vegetarian, so Vampire Penguin has vegetarian options, a little dessert place. But there are other options if you're vegetarian. Well, there's one other option if you're vegetarian, and please feel free to email me and I'll send you the link for that. Okay, so the rest of the breakdown of the course is there. Now let's go under our Files tab on Canvas, and I would like to show you something that somebody who took this class and then was an assistant instructor for this class, and by the way, like, knocked this class out of the park, man. She, like 103% or something by the time she was done. It was insane. She did extremely well. So go ahead and click on Study Tips for Acing this class under Files. So there's a module every week. Actually, if you're taking this class during the summer, there's 2, sometimes 3 modules every week. So familiarize yourself with the due dates. Because this class is so much work for you, it's also a ton of work for me, so I can't accept late work. And so now, if there's a paper due one night and you're working on the last bit of it before you edit it, and your kid comes upstairs and they're spurting blood from their ears and nose, and you email me at the hospital and say, I'm sorry, I need to hand in this paper late, I can make an exception for that. But if it's my boyfriend won't let me use the computer because he's on it all the time, I'm not going to accept late work for that. Or I overslept. I don't care. I'm not going to accept late work unless it's an emergent thing. So I've been too kind before, and it has really hurt my health, where I've been up until 3, 4 a.m. for finals week, having to get up at 5 and 6 every morning, and I'm too old for that, guys. It wrecks my health, and it lasts for weeks. I can't do this anymore. So no more late work. So if it's an emergency, we'll see what we can do. So under supplemental materials are my lecture notes under each module. She already put it over there. So I gave you some pointers on how to take notes using those. Skim through the lecture notes before you watch the videos. Every theoretical orientation, once we get into the theoretical orientation, every theoretical orientation will have about 3 of these videos. So we'll break it up into a 3-part unit. You have like 45 to 80 pages. There's a ton of reading every week. If you're taking it during the long semesters, it's about 20 to 40 pages a week. And there are 3 different books, so please pay very careful attention. You have the What's Behind the Research book, and we have some of the chapters on that uploaded for you under Files for those of you, because those are the readings you do up front and often. And then there's the Critical Issues in Psychotherapy text, and we have readings out of that, and then we have readings out of the Current Psychotherapies text. So if you want to, you can do what's called a directed study guide for yourself if you really struggle with quizzes. I used to give credit for directed study guides, but the university says we're not allowed to have volunteer TAs, so I can't have an intern TA or a directed study TA or an independent study TA anymore. So that means I lost 3/4 of my assistants. Actually, 3/4, 4/5 of my assistants. So therefore we've had to cut back a lot on what we can offer this class. So I'll put it on you. There are examples to where you can make a directed study guide for yourself. You don't get credit for it, but it does increase your quiz scores. So, and then writing prompts. Please be thoughtful. I love that example that she gives. She says there's writing assignment examples under files. I've looked at those. They're okay if you need a place to start. So the final paper, your theoretical orientation paper, she's got some good feedback for that, and she's got some good ideas about how to approach the final. And so hopefully that will help. Now, let me check my time because I've got another subject I want to get into. Okay, good. I think I have enough time to at least broach the subject. Okay. So click under lecture notes. And if you'll scroll down to a PowerPoint called Thinking Dimensionally. Okay. So this is a Draperism, the 4 dimensions of thought. It's a little model I've come up with to help us think about our own thinking and to get in tune with where other people are coming from. So I've noticed that good therapists think across the dimensions, and they're particularly practiced with 4th dimensional thinking. Less talented therapists think across a couple of the dimensions and aren't necessarily aware of what they're doing. So, the dimensions of thought. First dimension, what's called unary thinking. This is this. Okay? Means I also call it categorical thinking. This is where you get into a particular phenomenon and look at it for what it is in isolation to everything else and irrespective of everything else. So if I'm studying a psychological theory, for example, I'm not comparing and contrasting that theory to other theories. I am not seeing where the theorist is coming from, etc. I am just memorizing the content of that particular theory. Okay, Freud says the anal stage of development is from this age to this age, and I am just categorizing it as it is. I don't think critically about it at all. I just take it in and look at it for what it is. That's very simple first dimensional thinking. However, first dimensional thinking can also be very sophisticated. And you'll see this, for example, in your diagnostic and statistical manual. For those of you who go on to be therapists, which I hope many of you will, that the DSM, it's known as the Bible. It's not. Take my DSM class, I deconstruct it, kick it to the curb, and then urinate it and light it on fire. So the DSM is a good example of attempts to be sophisticated in first dimensional thought, where they'll take a phenomenon like depression and they will say, okay, if you meet a client and the client has these following symptoms, then you can check off categorically whether or not they meet criteria. You don't think about the symptoms you don't check or what those mean. You just count the number of symptoms, and if they hit a certain number, then you check off okay, so they need 4 out of 5 of these in order, or 3 out of 5 to be diagnosed. Click, 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 hit the go button, they're depressed, right? You don't think about the context of their depression or the nature of their depression or how it is there could be a whole bunch of other things that could explain these symptoms. You don't do that. You just check the boxes. 1, 2, 3, boom, done. Okay? That's also categorical thinking. Does this particular phenomenon fit in this particular category? For example, and you get to hear them, there are woodpeckers living And they've actually pecked into the side of my house right over here, up under the soffit of my roof. And I've got wooden siding along this particular part of the house. And there are a bunch of wasps' nests that I would have to spray down. Well, these woodpeckers came in, pecked their way through the side of my house, and I went to get rid of them because they're doing damage to my house. And then I noticed it was a kind of bird I've never seen before. Now, granted, I'm not an ornithologist. I'm not exactly an expert on birds. So I called animal control, and then they called like Fish and Game. And I was told that this is a very rare endangered species, short-billed, large. It's got a name like this long, but I'd never seen one before. And what these birds do is they keep all the wasps off here at the back of my house insofar as they can live in that particular space. So we now have a symbiotic relationship. What does this have to do with first dimensional thinking? Well, it was neat watching the Fish and Game woman as she was categorizing this particular bird morphologically. Like, she looked very carefully. She was taking zoomed in photographs for it, because back here it's like 20-something feet off the ground is where their nest is. So you can't really get terribly close. But it was neat where she was checking off the criteria of what kind of bird is this, and then she diagnosed, or actually categorized, the bird as this particular species of a very large short-billed woodpecker. And so it was neat watching her engage in this very rigorous first-dimensional thinking. So again, first-dimensional thinking is categorical thinking. It's where you just get into the thing as it is, and you may get into it very rigorously and thoroughly, but you don't think about it in relation to anything else, okay? So second-dimensional thinking is also known as binary thinking. Binary thinking is in terms of goods, bads, black, white, this or that, okay? Not this and that. We'll get into that later. It's this or that, black and white, good and bad, right? That you have one thing, and it is, you can categorize it all you want, first dimensionally, but simultaneously you're categorizing something else that is its opposite at the same time, okay? So there is a good idea and a bad idea. And anytime I'm outlining what good ideas are, I'm simultaneously, unknowingly sometimes, outlining what a bad idea is at the same time, right? This is good, and therefore I'm simultaneously defining this other thing as bad. Now, sometimes it's not necessarily goods or bads. Sometimes it is. Instead, it is oppositional thinking, right? Binary thinking, black and white, that I'm thinking in this term, I'm simultaneously thinking in terms of its opposite. Like in the Psychology of Sex and Gender class, and some of you may have taken that, we really get into dimensional thinking hard because it's all over the gender world. It's all over the sex and sexual identity world. And that is that there is moral sex, like sex that is good and moral, and then there is bad sex, sex that is immoral. And so these sexual acts are good, these sexual acts are bad, right? So anytime I'm defining good sexual acts, I'm simultaneously defining bad sexual acts. So, for example, there are states that legislate about the kinds of sexual activities that are allowed in bedrooms. A lot of people don't know this, but the laws are there. And so, like, there are some states that are so specific that anything outside of, like, missionary-style sex between a man and a woman who are married is considered sodomy. It's bad. So therefore, by very carefully outlining what sex was legal, they simultaneously identified all of these activities that were illegal. They didn't have to write any of them down because they already defined them by the sexual behaviors that are legal. Likewise, when it comes to sexual orientation, that I was quite startled by one of my students a few years ago, because in class he came across as having a very high-pitched voice, was very effeminate, was very gentle, spoke with his hands like I do. It was really neat. I felt very close to him. And then he comes into my office, and he's sitting there, and he's talking to me in this way, and he sees one of his friends peek in the door in my office. And his whole cadence and tenor changed. And he looks in front and goes, "What you want, boy?" Just flipped, and I'm startled seeing for the gone was the lisp and the light tone and the floaty hands, and instead it was like zeroed right in on his friend. "What you want?" You know what I mean? And I'm looking at him startled, like that was a sudden flip. And it was lovely the way he kind of shared that moment with me. He says, my voice is actually a tenor, or a deep tenor or a light baritone, but when I behave in a certain way, where I speak in my natural cadence and my natural tone voice, people then categorize me as straight. I'm not, I'm gay. So because we have a binary thinking culture, I act in this way so people will correctly identify me as gay, because if I act in this way, they will misidentify me as straight. That shows binary thinking in our culture, right? That straight people do this and gay people do the opposite. And likewise in terms of gender. If men do these things, then women do these opposite things. So if I write out what a man's role is, I'm simultaneously to a binary thinker writing out what a woman's role is, and they may be very, very offended. Now, if I'm intending to write it out in a binary way, they have every right to be offended, right? So second dimensional thinking, you'll find, is very common in the therapy field, both among clients and among therapists. Black and white thinking is associated, as I'm sure you know, with a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety, as well as a lot of helpful decision making. And so that's why people engage in black and white thinking, is it takes complexity, collapses it down into simplicity, and then people make a decision based on this now simple model. Okay? So the third dimension of thought is also called relativistic thinking or trinary thinking. Trinary thinking is when you look at this, but you look at it relative to all of the that's. That this thing, this particular theory, for example, of psychotherapy, let's pick on Freud for a minute, that Freud's theory is relative to his time and place and culture. So it's a social construction. So you hear third dimensional thinkers use that language, oh, it's just a social construction. It's all relative, right? They love using that phrase. And they can show us exactly how it is that it's all relative. And they're not wrong, just like the second dimensional thinkers aren't, just like the first dimensional thinkers. And so at the same time, they're also not all right, because if the more advanced your thinking is, praise, blame, black and white, good and bad, all of that begins to fall apart. And so, as well as relativism itself begins to fall apart. And so, Freud is not seen as pronouncing any truths of human nature. Instead, Freud is taken up as a particular person in a particular culture, in a particular language, who said certain things, and it's relative to that time and place and culture, meaning the insight is relative to that time and place and culture. So they'll read Freud out of interest, but not necessarily take him seriously as making any truth claims that might still be valid today, okay? So relativistic thinking is, you do you, boo, it's all relative, you know what I mean? And so when we see therapists who are third dimensional thinkers, when they're trinary thinkers, they're usually pretty involved in helping clients not take everything so seriously. That it's all relative, man. These goals and objectives and agendas that you have, it's all just relative. And so the rules of your parents, the rules of science, the rules of your religion, politics, economics, it's all just relative, okay? And so it really helps liberate people from second dimensional thinking. And so some people see third dimensional thinking as really good, but then sometimes what's really fun is when you catch third dimensional thinkers engaging in second dimensional thought. Well, religion is just a social construct. People are really stressed out by religion, so religion's bad. Gotcha, right? Now they've just engaged in black and white thinking, right? They've just regressed from third dimensional thinking to second dimensional thinking. You point it out to them, and it pisses them off. So it's a great way to tease them. I enjoy it, but I don't get invited to any of their parties. So fourth dimensional thinking is I'm not going to say it's the best, because a fourth dimensional thinker wouldn't say that. It's the rarest, and it's one of our goals in this class. It's one of the tacit goals. So I'm going to introduce this, and those of you who pay attention to the rest of the class will see a thread of fourth dimensional thought through the entire course. But it was actually a challenge from a student, because she started a few years ago seeing this very strong thread of thinking and said, what are you doing? I've noticed that every lecture involves this particular point of view, this particular way of thinking. And that's when I was very clean with her. And I said, well, I'm trying to tacitly teach fourth dimensional thinking. And she said, you're a jerk. Why don't you teach it explicitly? So this is for you, babe. I am teaching it specifically now, and have been for a while. And when she sees this, I will get a lovely Marco Polo from her telling me off. And so it's going to be awesome. So fourth dimensional thinking is this, always already in relation to all of the that's, and all of the that's are a part of what this is. It's also called quaternary thinking. And so everything is relational and contextual. Now some people say, well, Matt, isn't that relative? No. Contextualism and relativism are very, very different. Now some of you are saying, but Matt, they're also very similar. Yes, they are. But for the sake of argument right now, I'm going to emphasize that they're different, okay? Understanding that there's also some similarities, meaning that if we have a particular action in a particular way, it is informed in context and in relation to everything else that informs it, okay? So I'm thinking of 2 clients that I've had, for example. Both of them were cheating on their spouses, okay? Both of them came for counsel, both of the men, both of them came to counsel relative to the adulteries, okay? So the first man had gotten caught cheating on his wife for the 3rd time. And he was in trouble with his church. He was, they were talking about disfellowshipping him again. It's a particular phrase for his church, meaning they were going to limit his activities of membership. And he really wanted to work with me on how to have affairs better. Like how to have them in a way where they don't blow up and there's not the social media fallout and drama, there's not the firestorm of controversy. His bishop and stake president don't need to get involved. And so he was really trying to process where he kept dropping the ball, that his affairs kept coming public, okay? And so that's guy number 1. Guy number 2 was having an affair. His wife is emotionally abusive and controlling, and his affair was mostly emotional. They'd only had a make-out session with his paramour once, and he felt horribly guilty about it. His marriage was an ashen, nuclear blasted wasteland where his wife would regularly use the kids to abuse him. And so, like, one day, for example, he tried to establish boundaries with her around his work schedule, and then she started saying, well, you do that, and I'm going to call DCFS and tell them you've been sexually abusing the kids. And so when she found out, for example, he had been looking at divorce lawyers, then she moved out and then started telling the children that he was sexually abusing them. And so out of desperation not to go to prison, he reconciled with her, and all the abuse stories magically vanished. And so the kids, as I'm sure you're aware, they're 8, 9, and 10, are just really confused, really a lot of behavioral issues, a lot of issues at school, and he feels profoundly trapped. And so he was worried because first of all, he's in a toxic marriage, and if he gets caught having this affair, he knows his wife will use the children, and she will burn her children to the ground to make him suffer. And so, first dimensional thinking. Here is their diagnosis, right? The first guy, narcissistic personality disorder, and I'm going to go look up and then do my manual therapies on narcissistic personality disorder. The second client here is major depressive disorder and maybe dependent personality disorder. Now, it doesn't meet criteria for dependent personality disorder, so here's major depressive disorder, recurrent severe, right? That's first man, then I pull up the manual and then I do that therapy just on his depression. First guy, I do the therapy just on his narcissism. Second dimensional thinking. Adultery is bad. These clients are bad men. They're cheating on their wives, right? And so the second husband's wife is also bad. The first guy's wife the narcissist wife is totally innocent, and it's bad that he's doing this to her. And see, it's that kind of thinking, that these are good therapies you do with narcissists and all the others are ineffective. Use standards of practice, best standards of practice, empirically validated, or it's garbage, you know what I mean? That's second dimensional thinking. Third dimensional thinking. It's all relative, man. It's just my job to meet my clients where they're at. And if this guy wants to get really good at cheating on his wife in a way he doesn't get caught, and this guy wants to, do whatever he's doing in terms of figuring out his relationship in a way where he won't suffer, you just meet clients where they're at and you just do the thing the client needs regardless of who it affects, right? Fourth dimensional thinking. Oh boy. From a fourth dimensional frame, there is a context of the first client's adultery, and there's a context of the second client's adultery, which means that although adultery is the major theme of both of these men's presenting problems, the way you would take up treating them is very different because they're very different men in very different contexts. the narcissism of the first client is certainly a part of the concept, but then why is he narcissistic? Why is his narcissism manifesting in that way? It got really confusing because on one, he's very kind and genuinely very generous most of the time, but when it comes to his own sex life, he is highly entitled. Where does that entitlement come from? How is it that this is unfolding in relation? How is it that it's unfolding in relation to this religion and this wife and this family and the women he's having affairs with? Like, how all of that is going on in the context. And so part of it is also who is also being hurt by his affairs. And if, to a fourth dimensional thinker, that's part of the equation. That if he's cheating on his wife and it's hurting her, then that's a part of the discussion. Who's, I don't care if it hurts her, I just want to get off. It's why your bishop keeps getting called and why lawyers keep getting called is because you're doing this. Your wife's pain is a part of the reason you keep getting caught. So even if you look at it very one-dimensionally and very selfishly, Mr. Narcissist, it's still there. Likewise, with the second client, there are reasons why he is trapped. There is reasons why. That he can't just make the simple decision of just divorcing her, right? That there are a lot of other things that inform the context, including his helpless style in the face of them. The way he keeps capitulating to his wife in order to save some harms. It's a valid thing that he's doing. At the same time, by capitulating to harm, he is unfolding more harm. So the interventions aren't clear or simple. Instead, they're more tenuous. Okay, so this is our broad introduction to the class, a very brief introduction to the dimensions of thought, and our next unit is on assumptions and how those relate and imply to our behavior, how we actually interact and treat other people. So see you again very soon for the next unit.